YouTube, welcome into the USWNT Hour Show. Match day 7 in the NWSL has come and gone. Alex Morgan, she scored 8 goals in 7 games for San Diego. Casey Murphy, she's back in full form in between the sticks for North Carolina. And Margaret Purce, she scored her second goal for Gotham FC. We're going to break down all of the USA player evaluations throughout the league. And it's June. The international window for U.S. women's national team camp is around the corner, and it is about time Vlatko Andonovski names his 23-player roster. But before he does that, Lori and we wanted to name our 23-player wish list roster from goalkeepers to forwards. We're giving our prediction for who Vlatko Andonovski is going to call into camp. And a bit of breaking news out of France. USA forward midfielder Catarina Macario announced that she has torn her ACL. What does this mean for the U.S. women's national team heading into the summer with Concacaf W Championship and World Cup Qualifiers? All of this and so much more in today's USWNT Hour Show. Like this video and subscribe to the Attacking Third YouTube page right now to join the conversation in the chat, because we want to hear from you. Welcome into the USWNT Hour Show. I'm your host, Lisa Roman, alongside former U.S. international Lori Lindsey. You can join us live on youtube.com/attackingthird every Monday from 3 to 4 p.m. Eastern. Join the conversation in the YouTube chat. And you can listen to all USWNT Hour episodes on the Attacking Third podcast. Be sure to download and follow on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, and anywhere that you listen to your podcasts. Lori, welcome in. Happy Monday. How are you doing? Show off the guns for everyone.
Yeah, I was joking off screen that I have my muscle tee on for you, Lise, but it's great to be here as always. How are you doing?
I am good. We tend to chat about the weather. We're both in Philly. It's lovely today. We're not super humid. It's just the sun is shining. It's perfect June weather right now. Honestly, it's lovely.
Yeah, we are looking out. And yesterday was one of my first weekends at home here in Philly. Oh, well, I guess part of the weekend. I was here most of the time yesterday, but not on Saturday. It was beautiful yesterday too. So look at us lucking out. It's awesome.
Oh, it is about time we get some good weather here in Philadelphia. We've got a lot to get through today because there's been a lot happening across the NWSL. We've had so many midweek games happening. So instead of just 6 games a week, we've got 12 teams to recap and 7 games happening. So we're going to do a little bit of player evals from the NWSL and everything's happening there. There is some news that broke on yesterday about Catarina Macario. And Lori, we are giving our 23-player wish list roster for Vlatko Andonovski. That's probably my favorite thing that we get to do. Talk about the 23 players that we want to see called into camp, how they could rotate, and maybe a 24th player. We'll see what happens there. But before we get into it all, I want to remind everyone that we have a $100 Paramount Plus gift card to give away today. It is a full year subscription at Paramount Plus. We've had winners so far. Shout out to Maureen, who won last week. Congratulations to her. She got her $100 gift card. All you need to do is like this video and drop your social media handle in the chat. Don't put the @ symbol, but drop your social media handle, Twitter, Instagram, in the chat. You'll get a DM from us if you are our winner. We've got $100 to give away, and we want to do that for you. Lori, let's dive into some content here. Lots of NWSL games happening. Alex Morgan, she gets another couple of goals this weekend. She is leading the league in goals. 8 goals, 7 games for her. Margaret Purce, she nets a goal for Gotham FC. Andy Sullivan is back in the midfield for Washington Spirit. Mallory Pugh is back in full form. She's got 4 goals in her last 4 games. Rose Lavelle, she leads the NWSL in shots and shots on goal. There's U.S. women's national team players all across the NWSL that are on fire right now. What are you looking at when you're watching all these games? Which players are standing out to you?
Well, Sad Dingus said Pugh is on fire, and I completely agree. I think hands down, Mal Pugh is in the best form out of anybody in the NWSL. So fun to watch. Obviously, leading her team. I think Chicago has been a huge surprise. I was not high on them coming in, and I think they have certainly been a pleasant surprise. They're fun to watch. So Mal Pugh, I think Sophia Smith continues to perform well. And granted, didn't have a goal this weekend, but I think one thing about Sophia Smith is we're starting to see even more of the evolution of her game and just different parts come about, like her defensive presence. I mean, I think she's a constant threat to the back line, but obviously always the focal point and winning the ball, whether it's in behind, with her back to goal. So I think there's like some little bits of her game that we're seeing stand out more and more, which is exciting not only for the U.S. but for Portland as well. And then I would say Becky Sauerbrunn is a fun one. That's in terms of her coming back, getting some more consistent minutes. I think that is needed for this U.S. Women's National Team, especially with Goalkeeper's, where she is with the recovery of her broken ribs. So yeah, I think, a lot of teams plugging along, a lot of players plugging along. It's an interesting time in the league itself. You've got to start to grind a little bit, I think, before you head into this next window and qualifiers when players will be gone.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very interesting time because all of these players know that Vlatko Andonovski is watching them with their club teams, and it's the time to shine. I think what we're seeing, you gave a shout out to Sophia Smith, forward with the Portland Thorns. I've been really impressed with her. I think her game has elevated in the last few weeks in the NWSL. We've seen her with the national team, and she can be a superstar and she can score goals. But I think throughout the Challenge Cup, we weren't seeing full potential from Sophia Smith. And now throughout this regular season with Portland, she is coming a little bit more into form and, in a sense, having so much more confidence on the ball to take shots, put them away, send crosses into the box to get assists. Her partnership with Christine Sinclair is really fun to watch, and it's developing. And that's really promising to watch a young forward that doesn't look to do everything all her own. She looks to combine with the players around her, and that's what we're seeing from Smith. I've also been really impressed with Casey Murphy, goalkeeper for North Carolina Courage. She was out a bit to injury. She came back due to necessity, honestly, to start, and kind of got thrown into that role. But now with North Carolina, they are coming off their very first win of this regular season. But Casey Murphy is a goalkeeper for the national team that did so tremendously well in November for the friendlies in Australia, and then ended up getting injured for the start of the 2022 NWSL season. So her form, I was nervous about heading into this June international window and qualifiers coming up, because the goalkeeper position's there's not a lot of depth there right now for Vlatko Andonovski. So he needs players that are in form, including Casey Murphy for sure. Alex Morgan, I mean, she's got 8 goals, Lori. 4 of them are penalty kicks though, but her form, is it the same that we saw 5 years ago when she was on fire with the national team? Is it a different type of style that we're seeing from her? What are you noticing from Alex Morgan?
Well, I think what we're noticing is that she's converting, right? And you can make the argument that like half of those goals have been out from penalty kicks, right? But she's still stepping up and converting the penalty kicks when needed. And I think it's also interesting to look at like how the team is earning those penalty kicks, like against Kansas City on Saturday, forcing the handball on Elizabeth Ball, right? There's good pressure. I mean, listen, is this the same form that we've seen Alex Morgan in the years past? It's hard to say because we haven't seen her with the U.S. Women's National Team. Yes, this is the best form I think that we've seen her in the NWSL. But I mean, she's even talked about it, because I would say that I still don't think we're seeing the best of Alex Morgan. I think in some ways, San Diego, yes, like they're leading the league, right? They're number 1 right now, but not much is separating the one team. I mean, a few games going either way, the whole board of standings, right, looks completely different. So I don't put much stake in what's going on with the standings. But with Alex Morgan in San Diego, I don't love the way that they attack right now. I think it's pretty predictable. And especially with the front runners they have, I think they could be doing a lot more damage to some of these defenses than we're actually seeing. But I would say Alex is working incredibly hard for her team. I think she's trying to be an outlet. She is putting a ton of pressure on defensively, and they're forcing these mistakes on teams, right? They're putting these defenses and the opposition in precarious positions that are forcing the penalty kicks. But then also she's putting herself in good positions, and then is showing what she's always done in her career, which is be a clinical finisher. I think back to the North Carolina game a couple weeks ago, right? Not a ton of chances for North Carolina or Alex, but she finds that one, splits the 2 center backs, and then like honestly made no mistake about it. It was a terrific finish. So wasn't a convincing goal, the tying goal, right? Like it was like a little hobbled pass from Jakobsen, but like, listen, who cares? It's what you find the back of the net. She made it. So I think that it's an interesting conversation if she's in her best form. I don't know, but she's scoring goals, and that's what matters. And I think that's what you are graded on when you're an attacker.
Yeah, I think another player that is almost in a similar boat is Ashley Hatch. She's not necessarily scoring a lot of goals for Washington right now. I mean, she's not, but she's also being played in different positions, and Washington's been hit with a hefty schedule of back-to-back games in the NWSL. But it's something from Hatch is I like her in the middle way more than on the flank, and we've seen her a lot in the width with Washington and Chris Ward. So that's interesting to me to see how Ashley Hatch is adjusting to playing that forward role with tired legs and a lot of different player rotation around her. But I'm almost wanting a bit more from Hatch in that front line with what I'm seeing from her.
Yeah, I think the thing that we have to keep in mind is that, and you just alluded to it, listen, they've played a ton of games. They have, I think, hit worst with this schedule, the amount of game, the exhaustion. I think the attack out, when you think of the attack for Spirit, you think of Sanchez, Hatch, and Rodman, right? Rodman was out this last game. Sanchez has been in and out. And so I think it's tough to grade or say that we want a little bit more. I think that's a fair comment from you. I'm just saying these last several weeks I think has been unfair in some ways. But, and we're going to get into this in a little bit with the injury to Cat Macario, but I think that provides a different look for a Hatch because I was just speaking this to somebody else before this that, I think for the U.S., now that number 9 essentially could be open up, I would maybe go with a Hatch over an Alex Morgan in that position because of the versatility of a Hatch playing back to goal. Feels like she's more comfortable checking back into almost a 10 role. So some of my thought process will change now that Kat's out for at least the foreseeable future. And who fills that role, I think, looks a little bit different now with the needs and the players that are going to be around that center forward. Come June window and qualification in July.
Completely. I know that the talk about the front line and Catarina Macario, we're going to get to that in a second. I want to finish one more thought on this about the player evals in the league right now. I want to look at the midfield across the NWSL because Andi Sullivan is back in form with Washington Spirit. She's getting consistent minutes. She's slotting into that midfield that has played very well without her in that role. And now it's time for a Sullivan to command that defensive 6 role because when we look at the U.S. roster right now, it's not that deep. I mean, Jalen Howe for Racing Louisville is playing in that role, but she's being outshined by Savannah DeMello for Racing Louisville and other players. But Andi Sullivan in the midfield is doing really well for Washington Spirit. I think Rose Lavelle with OL Reign, we're seeing really magical things with her playing in that midfield with wingbacks with OL Reign and having the forwards, despite OL Reign creating so many opportunities, not being able to score. Rose Lavelle is a huge factor in the fact that they are creating so many chances. And as an attacking midfielder, that is really fun and really good to see, knowing that she's playing in the midfield for the U.S. team. Lindsey Herrera with Lyon dealing with a bit of an injury, but she's still powering through that, hoping to continue to get better. When you look across the league and even in Lyon in Europe with Lindsey Herrera at the midfielders for the U.S., are any of them standing out to you with the skills that they're doing? I mean, Ashley Sanchez, there's so many of them. Christy Mewis with Gotham. Gotham got their second win in the regular season on a goal from Margaret Purse up top. But midfield-wise, anything there for you, Lori?
Yeah, listen, I'll be honest, no one's completely wowing me right now in the midfield. And to your point, I think this is the least amount of depth that we've seen in this midfield position for as long as I can remember. I mean, that has been a really strong suit. And I'm not taking it away. The players that we've mentioned are incredible. But I think, Lindsey Herrera does seem to be a bit more injured than maybe is being led on. I don't think she looked her full self in the Champions League final, right? So what does it look like for her in terms of the amount of games that she can play, the amount of minutes? Spoke about Amy Sullivan. I think the one player, though, that I think deserves a call up, and when we go to our 23 players, you'll hear me talk about it, but is Sam Coffey. I think she looks like she's a seasoned pro at this point in time. She's played, well, she started every game for Portland. And she's an important piece to the way that they play. And I think that she's done well. When you're talking about current form, right? Sam Coffey deserves to get called in. And then I think that looks very different because Sam Coffey also has the ability to play higher up the field, where she did in college. This is the first time that we're seeing her a little bit deeper. But then it also adds versatility to Annie Sullivan as well, because Annie Sullivan, I think, at her best is more of a number 8. The ability to go to play make, go forward, not strictly just have to be the holding player or somewhat of a disruptor. So then all of a sudden the conversation changes incredibly because then who you play next to them, if those two players can play in the midfield. And that's still to be determined, right? Because we don't know if Coffey's getting called in, and 2, what that will look like at the next level, because it's a very different level, right? So, but those are my initial thoughts. Listen, let's go with that. And then when we talk about surgery, I'll add in my other thoughts on some of the midfielders, right? So.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good point because I like how you started this, though. None of them are wowing you. And honestly, that's the truth of the matter, that none of them are wowing us, which is a little bit concerning. But you gave us a sneak peek of your 23-player roster. But before we get into that, some news broke on Sunday morning. Catarina Macario, Champions League winner with Lyon, U.S. women's national team forward, midfielder. She can do it all. She announced on social media that she has torn her ACL. It actually happened in last Wednesday's match with Lyon. It was the season finale versus Issy. It was 13 minutes into the match. Cat goes down. Lyon ends up winning 4-0. But it was a pretty tough injury to watch in a game that didn't necessarily mean anything to Lyon. They had already won the Champions League. They had already won the league. Cat finished the season as Lyon's top goal scorer, 23 goals in 35 matches across all competitions. But this injury, devastating to see. Her announcement, Macario put out a statement on social media saying that, quote, unfortunately, injuries are a natural part of football. Tearing an ACL is never easy. And although I am devastated to be away from the field and my teammates for a few months, I could not be more proud of my first year as a professional footballer and to have helped the team reconquer 2 big titles this season. Then Lyon did put out a statement that she's going to need surgery and she's expected to be sidelined for 6 months. Devastating news to hear about the 22-year-old, the rising star, honestly, already risen star with the national team, has done so much. When you heard this news yesterday, Lori, what were your initial thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, completely bummed, right?
Yeah.
Because this is a player that you can tell loves the game, loves playing, and to what she said, has had an incredible year, and continues to progress not only with Lyon, played a significant role with them winning Champions League, but also I think really has started to come into more than started coming into her own. Really has proven to be the future and the now of the U.S. women's national team. And, so in a little bit of a different way than we saw last year, because I think last year leading into the Olympics, we wanted more. It was almost like Kat was still trying to find her way with the national team. And then starting this year, really took the number 9 position and the way that she wants to play it in her own hands and has led this team. So disappointment on an individual level for Kat, because you're bummed just with the injury in general. And then really unfortunate for the U.S. women's national team.
Yeah.
I think the tough thing is, though, is when you start to see the women's game as a whole, with the amount of minutes these players are playing and the competitiveness of the games, this is the reality going forward, is we're going to see more, not necessarily ACLs, hopefully not, but you're going to see injuries, right? Because these games are tough. The NWSL, we've seen the schedule that has already been put out. We've seen significant injuries to some really important players already. Tina Davidson, Sam Mewis, Lynn Williams, right? All of these players. So this is the unfortunate reality, I think, going forward. But also, on a positive note, makes an interesting discussion in conjunction to this discussion we've already been having for months now about like the depth up top, and then now what does that look like?
Completely. I mean, as you mentioned, so many injuries across soccer, women's soccer right now, and with the U.S. women's national team about injuries, you gave a shout out to Tierna Davidson recovering from an ACL right now. Lynn Williams out for the season as well, but Lynn Williams was also part of that front line for Vlatko Andonovski. And now without Kat as well in there, who is such a versatile player, she could play that number 9. She could drop into the midfield when the U.S. is lacking depth in the midfield. How does this change the front line for the U.S. knowing that Kat Macario is out for the summer and World Cup qualifiers?
Well, listen, I do think it changes the way the U.S. plays, because we don't have another player like Kat Macario, who's the way that she plays the number 9, right? Which is being able to drop back and almost play a 10 that allows like a Sanchez or Rose to get in behind. I think the way that Kat plays also, allows somebody like a Mal Pugh and Sophia Smith a little bit of a different way that they can play, right? In terms of cutting in and combining or drifting wide. I think the way that Macario really played that position, we started to see an evolution of how the U.S. can attack that we hadn't seen in a while. Because to the point that we were making earlier, I think if you put in somebody like an Alex Morgan, who's a true number 9, even Ashley Hatch, those two players play very differently than Kat does. And so then there's adjustments that are made around the field. However, I still think you're looking at a front line that consists surely of a Mal Pugh and Sophia Smith, right? And you can even interchange Trinity Rodman in there as she continues to get more time, I think, with the U.S. women's national team. But yeah, I think the question mark is then who's playing that number 9 and what does that look like around her? And that's when I think you're looking at least in my group of players, an Alex Morgan or an Ashley Hatch. You know, I really do. And at this point in time, I might not have had Ashley Hatch, and we spoke about this a couple weeks ago, as like the top of like number 1, but now she does, because these types of things change the whole perspective of the way that you're looking to play and who potentially is going to be on the field. So, I might put a Hatch up there as the true number 9, who has the ability to check back and link up. And she also has the understanding of playing with Sanchez and Trinity. And when you're talking about a young team that needs to build continuity, that's really important.
That is huge to have that familiarity from players. And then the transition is so much smoother. There's only 2 friendlies in June before the World Cup qualifiers, Concacaf W Championship. So Kat is out for those. Lyon put out in their statement 6 months. ACL is typically 6 to 8, 9. We just saw Nadia Nadim, the Danish international, come back after 233 days with her ACL playing in competition. But pretty quick turnaround that is hopeful for Catarina Macario. Looking ahead to the Women's World Cup in July of 2023, she could be back for that, right? Timeline wise?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, I think we saw, Ellie Carpenter is another one, the right back for Lyon, just tear her ACL in the Champions League final. So, yeah, certainly. I think it's crunch time, especially not only just thinking about the repairing of the knee and the healing of that, but the confidence that you're okay and that you can perform at a level that you're used to performing as a player on the field. Like there's an emotional, mental aspect that I don't think is talked about a ton when you're coming back from injury. That would be a process in all of this as well. So that's something to look at. But at the same time, doable. I mean, as you mentioned, Nadia Nadim, right? And the goal for her is to get back for the Euros with Denmark. And so, yeah.
Yeah, there's so many.
Individual. It's so individual, right?
It is so individual. Luckily, Catarina's only 22 years old. So the recovery on a 22-year-old body is hopefully a little bit smoother, easier, faster than, say, a 32-year-old body. But yeah, I mean, you mentioned it. It's not just making sure her knee is stable after an ACL injury, because I'm sure there's a little bit of other cleanup that the doctors are going to do while they're in there. So making sure the knee is stable, that she gets her strength back, but then endurance, making sure fitness is back at its top level, touch coming back, which I doubt it'll go too far in a player like Catarina Macario, but that's also another factor in this, making sure that the level of play and the level of technical ability is still there, and it'll be different. And her getting to know her new knee and her new body, it's a bit of an adjustment period to come back from an intensive injury like an ACL tear. And then on top of that, coming back in and having the confidence mentally to be able to go hard into tackles again. I mean, I've had a handful of knee surgeries, and that's always a scary thing when the first time you're back in training and you're not non-contact and you can make a tackle. How do you go in? You're thinking about it versus 6 months, 8 months before that, you weren't thinking about that. You're just going in hard to make the tackle. So it's so much physical, but a lot of it is mental and emotional coming back from an injury.
Exactly.
Love that we talked about NWSL stuff. Catarina Macario, any updates that we have on her or anything else, we will let everyone know. But we get a 23-player roster predictions that we have to dive into, Lori. I am so excited to hear yours. You gave us little tidbits of them, but I'm excited to hear all about them right after this very quick break.
I'm not comfortable living in a hot dog. Still way better than your house, kitty! I can't do this anymore, Mom. If you won't listen to me, then I really don't have a choice.
So you're running away?
South Park, The Streaming Wars, now streaming.
Okay, well, I'll see ya.
Bye, honey.
Cute.
Exclusively on Paramount Plus.
Welcome back to the USWNT Hour Show. I'm Lisa Roman, your host, alongside former U.S. international superstar Lori Lindsey. I love to drop that superstar in there. We are talking about our June camp for the U.S. women's national team, 23-player roster predictions. We've each come up with a list, goalkeepers to forwards. We're going to read them off and go through all of that. I'm incredibly excited to hear Lori's take on her roster. Before we get into that, I want to remind everyone that I have a $100 Paramount Plus gift card to give away. That's a full year's subscription. All you need to do is drop your social media handle into the chat without the @ symbol and like this video. We'll pick a winner. We'll send you a DM. Like this video, drop your social media handle in the chat, and then look out for a DM from us if you win. All right. It is June. There's an international window coming up. Players for the Euros have already reported. U.S. is coming up. Vlatko Andonovski will call in 23 players to this camp with his rosters. We get to make predictions, Laura. We have all the power right now. Your wish list, your predictions. Let's hear it. Let's start with the goalkeepers because we've had so much different rotation. Let's start with the goalkeepers, which is usually 3 to 4 players on these type of rosters. Who do you have in the back line?
Yeah, I mean, this isn't going to be surprising, but I have Alyssa Nair, I have Casey Murphy, and Aubrey Kingsbury. And listen, the reason why I chose those 3 is because Aubrey Kingsbury has consistently over several years been one of the best in the NWSL. You have Alyssa Nair, who's proven herself in both. Murphy has also shown her capabilities. We saw that in November in the league, but also in November in the Australia 2 games, international games back in November. So those are my 3. Yes, do I feel like there's been a lot of talk about Tullis Joyce? No doubt. Like, she's been incredible for OL Reign. But at the same time, first year in the league, I think when you're looking at the depth of our goalkeepers in this in the U.S., consistency at this level is extremely important. And all 3 of those goalkeepers have proven that they can do that at this level. And obviously Alyssa Nair at the next level, right? So that's why I've gone with that. I think there's no need to rush Tullis Joyce, allow her to get this first year, and then continue to prove her ability consistently in the league, then get a call in. And maybe, not for 2023, but for 2027.
Yeah, exactly. You have to remember that there is a World Cup. So calling these players in is essentially Vlatko Andonovski saying your potential to go to the World Cup. What can you play at the international level? I agree with your selection. I've got Alyssa Nair, Casey Murphy, and Aubrey Kingsbury as well. I love watching Aubrey Kingsbury play. I'm going to be honest. I just like watching her play. She's always got this tough as nails look on her face that she's not going to let anything get past her. When we look at these June windows, I think Alyssa Nair get most of the time, but I would love to see Kingsbury get minutes in there. I honestly think Kingsbury could get more minutes over Casey Murphy at this point, just based on play, little bit of health availability in there between those two. But yeah, I mean, the tout about Fallon Tullis-Joyce, let her get a year in the NWSL. There are other options for Vlatko Andonovski if he needs a little bit more depth. I mean, Jane Campbell was at the Olympics. I don't think that she'll be called into this camp, though. AD Franch also with Kansas City Current. But I agree with this selection, 3 for 3 right now on the same page for goalkeepers, Nair, Murphy, and Kingsbury. The defensive line, it's been hit with some injuries. Tierna Davidson out. Becky Sauerbrunn was out. She's back playing with Portland Thorns. But this is a defensive line that needs to be good, patient, and have a little bit of versatility and different looks in it. Lori, who's listed as your defenders on your roster?
Yeah, I have 7 defenders on this 23 roster, and I have Alana Cook, I have Becky Sauerbrunn back in the mix, Kelly O'Hara, Emily Fox, Naomi Girma, Sophia Huerta, and then I have an asterisk by her name, but I have Abby Dahlkemper involved as well. I think it really just depends on her coming back from the rib injury. I put her in there because I think when I'm looking across the board, obviously we have some injuries to this back line. Crystal Dunn's still come back from maternity. I'd slip her in one of those slots as well. But I do think prior to the injury for Abby Dahlkemper, I would put her over an Emily Sonnet right now. And also Emily Sonnet's not even playing center back for Vlatko. And all of the, yes, and I see that Catherine Wickersham is saying that Kelly O'Hara, yes, but like these players, we still have 3 weeks before they're getting called in, and Kelly O'Hara would be a player that's going to be called in for some of her experience, for her leadership role, so they can still 100% be called back in and be working within the team to get back and ready to go. Because I fully expect those players to be called in for qualifiers.
Yeah, I think Kelly O'Hara is one that is out with a bit of a hamstring injury right now, but we don't really know how serious that is. Washington was playing back to back to back to back. So the rest there from her is not at all surprising at the club level, but national team wise, you're right. I expect her to be called in, even if she's still dealing with a bit of a hamstring injury, but I still expect her to be called into camp. Yeah. I agree with you on O'Hara on that one. I don't think Dahlkemper is going to be back ready to play. I mean, this is like pure speculation on my side here, but she's out with a rib injury. We haven't seen her in a little with San Diego Wave, and that hurts the national team with losing Dahlkemper as a center back. Yes, there's Becky Sauerbrunn in there and Alana Cook, but losing Tierna Davidson, potentially losing Abby Dahlkemper, those are some holes that Vlatko Andonovski needs to figure out how to fill. So I think Naomi Girma for sure gets called in because he needs to have depth in that center back role. Otherwise, I had the exact same for you. I did not have O'Hara on my list just based on her injury right now, even though I think she probably will get called in. And I slotted Sonnet in for her with Fox and Huerta on the outside, Girma, Cook, Sauerbrunn, and Sonnet in the midfield, and O'Hara as well. She'll probably be in there. Dahlkemper, right? Like this is where the depth issue starts to begin with this national team. Who can fill those roles? When we look at outside backs, Fox and Huerta, O'Hara, who else?
Well, that's who I'd have right now.
That's
I would also have Dunn in there.
Okay,
when she's back from maternity. But yeah. But like right now, those would be the 3. This is where it'd be interesting though, because obviously Sonnet has had some longevity with the national team. Currently, do I think that she's played consistently enough? No, I don't. And what I mean by consistently, yes, she's played the minutes, but do I think she's been good in the back? No, I think she's been below her average with the Spirit right now. But she also plays outside back for Vlatko. She doesn't play, he doesn't even give her a look. So this is when, if Goalkeeper is not ready to go, then do you bring Sonnet just from her experience, because she's going to be playing that outside back. And then I don't think Kelly Herrera is as injured as like because she's not playing games. I think it's more precautionary to be ready.
I agree.
So that's why I slotted in. And this is nothing new for Kelly, and she's ready typically. So, I mean, this has been her whole career, whether it's her ankle or hamstring. So this is nothing new. And she's proven that Vlatko really likes her, right? I mean, she's a lot of games. Like, I am high on Huerta. I like what she does. But Kelly O'Hara consistently gets more minutes than Huerta so far under Vlatko. So how does that change? We'll see. But,
It's a shame about Dunn just not being back. I mean, it's not really a shame. She just gave birth and she's a new mom. Huge congrats to her. But to have her back would allow this team to look very different in the back line with a Dunn and an O'Hara on those outside back roles. And even having Kelly O'Hara in there, despite dealing with a bit of an injury, as that veteran alongside Becky Sauerbrunn as a vocal leader who can connect with young players. I mean, we see that with Washington Spirit. It's O'Hara and Sonnet as the veterans in a sea of players that are new to the league or younger to the league. So yes, I like what we've got so far. Pretty much agreeing so far. We're gonna see, because now we get to look at the midfield. Lori.
Yeah. I think a lot of this is not like totally, we will agree on a lot. I fully believe, because I don't think this is like, some of this isn't,
there's not that many options.
Yeah, you're not going to have overhaul rotation before you're going in. Well, one, we're a year out from a World Cup. Two, we've also seen pretty consistent, even with Vlatko bringing in quite a few younger players. Like, there's just, you're not going to see these overhaul changes, right? Like, you're not, barring any like significant injuries to multiple players. It just is not going to happen. So my midfielders, though, this is where I switched a little bit, because originally I had 7 in the attack when Cat Macario was still healthy. But now I've actually switched to 7 in the midfield for this June camp, just because of the fact that I think we need to kind of like solidify some things going on in the midfield compared to some of the more nuanced stuff that's in the attack. So I have Andy Sullivan back in the mix. Lindsey Horan, I think there's some, no doubt she'll be ready to go, but I think there are some question marks in terms of like how many minutes.
Right.
I do feel like that's a nagging injury that has been lingering longer than has been made public. I have Rosa, obviously, Ashley Sanchez. I do have, and this one starts to get a little bit interesting, because my last 3 are Christy Mewis, Sam Coffey, and Jalen Howell. And I went with these 3 because I do believe Sam Coffey deserves a call up 100%. And this is the time to do it. Whether she's going in the next, I think this roster in June will look fairly similar to qualifiers. However, I think there could be a few different changes, but I do think that Sam Coffey deserves a call up and a look from her play with the Portland Thorns. And then Christy Mewis and Jalen Howe. Do I think they've been exceptional? Absolutely not. But I think Christy Mewis has looked better with the national team than she has with Gotham. And I don't particularly think anybody's looked amazing with Gotham. So I think this is where it gets a little bit hairy with you're going off of the exact form that you're in, because sometimes it's unfortunate with the team that you're on. If they're not producing and you're not performing well as an overall team, then it's like a disaster, right? But Christy Mewis still has the ability to be impactful and has shown that at the national team level. Do I think she needs to be a lot more consistent on all levels? Yes. I think in Houston, we saw a lot of glimpses of her being able to drop back and play make and be a little bit more of an 8. And when there's question marks maybe about Horan and the amount of minutes she can go consecutively, then I do think Christy Mewis. But I do think there has to be enough that has to come from within, and she has to kind of like figure that out. And then Jalen Howe. I mean, listen, I've been kind of vocal. Like, is she my favorite number 6? No. But I think when there's still question marks on if Sam Coffey does get called in, does she? How does she perform at the next level? I think Andy's still coming back. So I put Jalen Howell in there for the ability to like add some depth into this June window. So those are mine.
I like this. I like your call-ins. I mean, you gave us a sneak peek about Sam Coffey earlier when we talked about NWSL evaluations, and you've been so high on her, and she is incredibly impressive to watch play, especially with Portland, with what they're trying to do. She's really fit into a very good role with them as a player that gets limited touches on the ball, but makes a huge impact because of her limited touches. She's not looking to hold it very long. She switches the point of attack. She has really good vision, and she can read her players really well. Now, pulled into a national camp, I'm not sure how much is going to translate just based on like familiarity, because we weren't seeing this type of play in the Challenge Cup with Sam Coffey. It did take a little bit of time to get her into this mix. Now, also, she's playing a lot deeper with Portland than she did at Penn State, where she was playing collegiately. However, the versatility there to be with the national team is huge. If Antonovsky has a player that he can drop into that 6th position and throw Andy Sullivan higher, or vice versa, push Coffey a little bit higher, I think that's huge as well. If Sam Coffey gets pulled into this camp, I'm not sure how many minutes we would see of her in these 2 friendlies. I imagine it would be limited, but you never know. I think that call-up could be a good look for Vlatko to think past just this summer, right? You have to look ahead to the World Cup in this one. I had very similar lineup in my midfield: Lindsey Horan, Rose Lavelle. I've been really excited about what I'm seeing with Rose Lavelle this year. She's staying healthy, knock on wood. She's creating good opportunities for OL Reign. Andy Sullivan thrown in there. Ashley Sanchez doing phenomenal. I have Jalen Howell as well. The depth. She's been called into camps before. She was in with the She Believes. She's been in with Vlatko Antonovsky, and this crop of players, I think calling her in again would be beneficial. I think it would really help with her confidence as well, playing with Racing Louisville too. That would help. But again, I'm not sure how many minutes we would get from a player like Howell. And maybe the battle between Coffey and Howell in that 6th role would be very interesting to watch. I'd love to be a fly on the wall at those trainings and kind of see how they play with and against each other and the differences in specific training situations between those 2. Christy Mewis as well. I think she's been there, right? She's been in these types of situations and qualifiers and with the national team. So almost a bit of a veteran mindset there as a player who's been in and out of the camps. I think Christy Mewis could provide a little bit of depth in that midfield. I also have Sam Mewis because I'm hopeful.
Yeah, I don't see it with Sam Mewis. I think, she's consistently on the injury report.
I know.
But I understand. Like, listen, I'm hopeful for that too eventually, but not in this near future. I think she's even training. So, but so who did you have? So you had 8 midfielders?
Yeah. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.
Yeah. Okay.
Horan, Lavelle, Sullivan, Sanchez, Howell, Mewis.
Yeah. So then so you have 8. Okay.
Yes.
So then you'll have, so I went with only 7 and then I have 6 strikers. And my 6 strikers, are we going there now?
Yeah. Let's hit me with your forward.
Now, Sophia Smith. I have Alex Morgan, Kristen Press as the 2 more veteran players, along with Trinity Rodman and Ashley Hatch. So those are the players that I have going into this June camp. I think it's a good mix. I think when you think about Cat Macario and what I mentioned before, is I originally had 7 strikers and only 6 midfielders, but now I think that looks a little bit different. So I'm only taking 6 strikers. And I think that gives a good balance. I think Malpew, Sophia Smith, Trinity Rodman, and Ashley Hatch, those 4 young players, I think are consistently have been the best strikers in this league. Mm-hmm. And I would more so say Malpew, Sophia Smith, and Trinity Rodman. And then I would put Ashley Hatch in there as like coming along in some regards, even though I know that the work that she does kind of off the ball. But then Alex Moore and Kristen Press, I think that looks a lot different now with Cat Macario out. I do think it's important to have some of that veteran experience that you have proven at this level to score goals outside of Malpew, right? She's proven that she can score.
She has definitely proven that she can score. I love watching Mallory Pugh play right now. Yeah, Pugh, Smith, Morgan, Hatch, Rodman, Press. I second it. I agree with all of it. Who would be your starting 3 in that front line if Vlatko's playing with 3 in the front line? Because we've talked about it before, and Cat Macario was in that starting lineup for you. Now, when you look at the 6 forwards that you want to be called into camp, what are your 3 and where are they on the field?
Yeah, I think for my 3 right now, looking at this, because it's changed quite a bit without Kat, because that was like, I mean, she was my leading goal scorer, and that looks like she was like a mainstay for me.
Yeah.
But I would go with Malpew on the left, Sophia Smith on the right. I'd probably put Ashley Hatch as the number 9, because she offers just a little bit something different. And the reason why that changes is because Alex Morgan and Kat Macario are such different players that when Kat was on the field, I would have probably bought, if we're specifically talking about number 9, I would have probably brought Alex Morgan off the bench in different situations, and then Kat could float to a winger or even as a number 10, and you could just move players around. But with that injury, then Ashley Hatch moves up in that ranking just because of her different style of play and how I think that tends to elevate the other players around her. I think that allows Ashley Sanchez to get more minutes potentially with their understanding on the field from the Spirit. I think it also lends to the traits of an Ashley Sanchez or even a Roosevelt, even if those 2 aren't playing together. I think it lends to their ability and getting in behind maybe a Hatch that could drop a little bit deeper at times.
Yeah, I mean, the difference in having a Hatch or Macario or Morgan in that center striker changes entirely how the team would play. You just gave a shout out to Ashley Sanchez. We've seen her play in the front line for Chris Ward and Washington Spirit. Do you think that's a possibility that Vlatko Andonovski would move Sanchez out of the midfield and into the front line at some point?
For Vlatko, no, I don't think so. I don't think at the international level for Sanchez. I think she's better when she's getting faced up and running at the back line. Not that she can't do that in the number 9. I'm just thinking about like teams wanting to clog the midfield, and I think Sanchez will ultimately be better, being able to have a little bit more room to roam and deeper and pick up the ball and getting behind at times, making her timing of runs, I think is excellent. So yeah, we'll see. Listen, let's put this all to bed with the people in the chat about Megan Rapinoe, because if you're just coming in, there's got to be context with all of this, right? Megan Rapinoe was 100% on my list if she was healthy and going into the World Cup qualifiers because of her experience and the different ways she played. It wasn't just like, let me just put some people on a list without any context. So if you're coming into we appreciate everybody in the chat, but like, let's just not make these blanket statements that don't make any sense and you don't have any context with. You're just throwing out somebody's name, because there was a ton of context and conversation about why I had Megan Rapinoe on that list, right? And some of these veteran players. Also, Becky Sauerbrunn I had on the list before she even started playing significant minutes, and no one wanted to push back on that. So let's just come in here and understand what the conversation is if you're joining into the chats, because it doesn't make any sense.
I love it. Don't come after her on Twitter, anyone. She's got context for her statements now.
Just add to the conversation. Don't just put somebody's name if you don't have anything to add to the conversation, because then it's just useless.
Yeah, call them out, Lori. I love this. Call them out. So no Rapinoe on your list this time, but for good reason.
Well, no,
she's
exactly.
She's injured right now. Completely. I like your list. You gave us 23. It's a good round group of players that could be called in. Now, a lot can happen between now and when this roster is named. We just saw Cat Macario announce she tore her ACL. A lot of different things can change and things can happen. When you look at this list, who's your 24th player? Who's the player that just barely missed the cutoff for this one?
Yeah, this is an interesting one, because I had 2 players in mind, 2 rookies actually, that I would like to, that I think could potentially get called in going forward. But my 24th is Elise Bennett. I really like this young player, and I think it's just going to take time. And also, I think, given everything that we've talked about with the depth, even with Cat Macario, I think Elise Bennett's ceiling is incredibly high. Her and Kristen Hamilton have created a wonderful partnership for Kansas City. And so I really would like to see this young player called in. I think she just misses it this time, especially with like just sorting things out, as I mentioned about the midfield and giving an extra player there. But I I do think. My other one, additionally, that I was thinking for the 24th is Michaela Clough. I think this just goes back to the fact, though, she still needs to be more impactful, and partially that could be with her team. Right now, Orlando obviously not getting a ton of amazing results, and the play in general feels a little bit labored for them. So I think there's opportunity for her, and she showed that she can play as a 6. She is more impactful, I think, higher up, and we've heard that being an ongoing conversation as well. But she certainly, as a player, I had picked early on as my rookie of the year. So we'll see how that pans out as like time goes on after these qualifiers. I think it just might be a little too early for the amount of games that she has under her belt at club level right now.
Michaela Clough has impressed me with Orlando and what she's been able to do on a team that is lacking a little bit of creativity in their attacking end. Clough is bringing that to them as a rookie. The shout out to Elise Bennett, the rookie forward from Kansas City. Yes, huge shout out to her. That she's been tremendous to watch with Kansas City. A really fun player. She's got creative ways to get in behind in the attack. I like that these are your 2 wild cards, your number 24s. Mine, Margaret Purse with Gotham. Yeah, I think that she is a player that's been in camps before. She understands kind of what it is all about being on the national team. We haven't seen her produce as well as I want to with Gotham, but Gotham's not doing great right now. She did just score the game-winning goal for Gotham this past weekend in the NWSL, but she can play in the front line for Vlaco. She can play in the back line. She can play as an outside back. We've seen that versatility from Purse. So she is my 24th that just barely made it. I think if Gotham were performing a little differently right now, it would look differently for her. But it's when you create chances and you get opportunities to score, you have to put them away. But maybe getting called into a camp, Purse could be a little bit better at that. But I like this. I like what we're talking about. I love making these roster predictions. We ran through a lot today, Lori. This hour went by incredibly quick, but we talked about a lot of things. Before we close out, final thoughts from you on anything that we talked about today, anything random from left field, hit us.
Yeah, no, the one thing I would say is I like your pick about Margaret Purse, because I do think unfortunately, it does feel like she's fallen out of kind of the mix recently. And I think that's, somewhat to do with some injury, but then also just like the general form of Gotham right now, and not having scored a ton of goals. So I do hope that she gets back in, because I do think that she adds a little something different as well. And not to forget that she's also played as a right back. Not that Vlaco would use her as that, but I think when you're coming down to like some of these final decisions, to have some of flexibility in some different positions for players is important, even if it means just for the immediate future or long-term, right? I think those are still things that will be hashed out going forward, but I do like that pick, and it'll be interesting. I think hopefully this time next week or very close after, at least in the next one of these episodes, we'll be able to like actually break down the roster and see how close we were, and maybe more of the reasons why certain players were picked or not. So I think this is an exciting time regardless, right, of like what's happening, and an intriguing time just with some key players being injured.
It is a very key time. The U.S. women's national team plays 2 friendlies in June, one on the 25th, Saturday, and one on Tuesday, the 28th, ahead of the Concacaf W Championship that starts early on July 4th, all while NWSL action is continuing to happen, because who doesn't love a little chaos with lots of overlap and players coming and leaving? Lori, thank you so much for being here. It's always such a pleasure to chat with you. Thanks everyone for joining us in the chat. If you like this video and you dropped your social media handle in the chat, look out for a DM from us. You could be our Paramount Plus subscription winner. Be sure to follow us on Twitter at Attacking Third for more. We're also on Instagram and TikTok at Attacking Third. And you can listen to us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, anywhere that you get your podcasts. Subscribe to us on YouTube to catch all of our interviews and get alerts for when we go live, youtube.com/Attacking Third. We'll be back next Monday for another USWNT hour. Lori, thanks so much for being here and giving us your roster predictions. And thank you everyone in the chat and everyone listening.